This week we're going to cover chapter 4 in your Silverthorne physiology book, and it's all about energy and cellular metabolism. There's quite a bit of ground that we need to cover in this chapter, and so we're going to first take a look at sort of energy and biological systems in general, and that includes, of course, chemical reactions and enzymes. And we're going to take a look at metabolism. Now that's all the sum total of all the reactions that are going on in a cell. First, we're going to take a look at how we generate ATP, and so that would be aerobic metabolism. And then we're going to take a look at transcription, translation, and replication, all of which are big processes that are taking place in cells. So a little bit of a background in biology really helps in this chapter because everything's very condensed in this chapter, and it's sort of expected that you have a little bit of a background from general biology to know sort of roughly what transcription, translation is and how it works, and replication and aerobic metabolism. So if you have taken a general biology class, this will come in handy for this chapter. Let's take a look at properties of living organisms. When you ask somebody, how do you describe life, or what is life, and what are properties of living organisms, inevitably most people will say that living systems, that they reproduce, they develop, they grow. Also, some people may say that there's movement, which is true for animal cells, but not so much for plant cells usually. So anyway, we have these complex structures, and the basic unit of life is the cell. And these cells, they can form energy or make energy, transform energy, store energy, and use energy. And they are able to sense and respond to their environment. Then we have these feedback systems that we talked already about. We can also store, use, and transmit information. For that will be the nervous system and also the endocrine system. And then we have these different species that can change, and individuals that can adapt. So these are the main properties of living organisms. Now let's take a look at sort of the big picture in biology. And this is it. The big picture in biology is sort of the movement of energy through the system. Really, it all starts out with the sun. So the sun is very important because it provides the energy to do photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, we're taking CO2 and water to make carbohydrates. A byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. And that oxygen plus the carbohydrates made by photosynthesis provide the food that we eat, and then we do respiration to break those carbohydrates back down into CO2 and water, and we're extracting the energy for the work that our body will do. So there's this equation that really every biology student should know. And that equation is that in photosynthesis, we're going to take 6 CO2 plus 6 water, H2O, and then with the help of the sun, we're going to make carbohydrates out of that. And so generic carbohydrate, just like glucose, would be C6H12O6. And as a byproduct of photosynthesis, we're just going to generate also 6 oxygen, 6O2. So here you can see that we're going to take inorganic CO2, a gas, water, H2O, 6 waters, and we're going to use sunlight energy. We need to have sunlight energy. This is driving the whole process of photosynthesis because we're going uphill from an energy perspective, and we're generating carbohydrates and then oxygen. Now that's photosynthesis, but think about what you're doing in your metabolism. How do we get the energy back out of the carbohydrates? So we're eating carbohydrates as an example, and we're breathing in oxygen, and then we're going to go the opposite direction. We'll take the carbohydrates and plus the oxygen, we'll do aerobic respiration, we'll break this back down into water and CO2, and we generate about 36 ATP out of this. ATP 36. And we'll see that in aerobic respiration. Just please keep that equation in mind. This is really important. And, this is how basically the sun drives life on Earth by providing food by photosynthesis. So without the sun, there would be no photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, we wouldn't have anything to eat. So if the sun ever goes out on us, we're done on planet Earth. But anyway, for now, we're good. Sun is still shining, and so we're doing good. Let's take a look at some definitions. The energy is defined as the capacity to do work. And chemical work would be making and breaking of chemical bonds. Then, of course, there's transport work to move stuff from one place to another. And mechanical work would be to move, let's say, a whole organelle from one place to another, or contraction of muscles. Muscle contraction would be also mechanical work. Now, energy in general comes in two forms, either energy that's used right now or energy that's stored for later. Kinetic energy is energy that is being used right now. So the energy of motion, examples for that would be you running, you biking, burning a log of wood, burning gasoline in your car to move. So all of that would be kinetic energy. And potential energy is stored energy. So that means we're saving the energy for later. That will be the energy that is in a concentration gradient, or you up on a hill before you allow yourself to roll down with your bicycle, for example, or the log of wood in your fireplace, but not turned on, not you haven't fired it up. So the potential energy must be converted to kinetic energy if you want to perform any kind of work. So now the transformation efficiency between potential energy and kinetic energy, that can be an issue. So if you think about your car, so the gasoline in your car without being used is potential energy. To turn that into kinetic energy, i.e. you're driving your car, is about 25% energy efficient. Now, our cells are a little bit better. It's approximately 40% energy efficient to turn glucose or carbohydrates into ATP usable energy for cells. So that's just to give you some ideas. So here is kind of a silly example of the different types of energy. So this ball right here has potential energy. So we're not using it right now, but we did have to put in the energy. This guy is sweating, putting up this ball there all the way up to the top. So we're putting energy into the system. So up here we have potential energy, and we can release that energy if we let that ball roll down. Okay, now let's take a look at the first and second law of thermodynamics. That's always a favorite. The first law of thermodynamics states that there is a fixed amount of energy in the universe, and that energy amount is there. You can't change that. But what you can do, you can change that amount of energy from one form into another. So the total amount of energy in the universe is constant, but you can change energy from one form to another. So you can change potential energy into kinetic energy. You can use stuff for movement, so you can change things. The second law of thermodynamics says that the entropy always increases. The entropy is disorder. And basically think of the log of wood. It's a pretty concentrated form of energy, potential energy. And then you are burning the log of wood and it generates heat. Heat is not a very confined form of energy, so it's sort of random, and it's has more of this disorder to it. So in other words, when we go from a log of wood or charcoals, and then we're burning them and transforming that into heat, that's when the entropy increases. And that is the second law of thermodynamics, that when we're changing from one form of energy into the other, then the entropy increases. Okay, so moving on to chemical reactions. That is sort of, we're looking here a little bit into bioenergetics, which follows sort of the flow of energy through biological systems. We're going to take a look at some chemical reactions, and mostly we're going to take a look at enzyme reactions and how reactants become products, and the rate of the reaction and how it can be changed using an enzyme. there's an activation energy that's typically necessary to make something go. If we didn't have that activation energy, then everything would just randomly explode on us, and these reactions would just take place randomly without you having any control over it. So the activation energy is actually a good thing. It takes a certain amount of energy to get something going. And we're also going to take a look at the net free energy change. That means, do the products have more or less energy than the reactants that we first put in? Now, if we have exergonic reactions, that means energy came out of the system, and so the products have less energy than the reactants. Endergonic reactions, there the products have more energy, so they absorb, sort of the system absorbed energy, and the products have more energy than the initial reactants. In biological systems, a lot of times we have coupled reactions, and also we have a lot of times reversible reactions, like photosynthesis and aerobic respiration per se are not, overall reversible, but in a sense they are. It's just that there are so many different steps in between, and you will see how many steps there are. So reversible reaction means that it can go both ways. We had another example of that earlier when we talked about water and CO2 forming carbonic acid, which then works as a buffer system in the body. And so the carbonic acid can always fall apart into CO2 and water. So that's a good example of a reversible reaction. Or something irreversible, think of frying an egg. You can't unfry it. Once it's fried, then the protein is denatured, and that's irreversible. You can't change that. Okay, so here are some examples of different types of chemical reactions. For example, combination reaction would be A plus B forming C. We're not going to get too technical about all of this. We do have some decomposition reactions where C is the reactant and falls apart into products A and B, but I'm not going to spend much time on this. So here is something very important, and that is the concept of the activation energy. So that means my reactants are right here, and my products are down here. So obviously on the energy scale, so here's my energy bar, I'm definitely going down. So this is an exergonic reaction. Energy will be released in the process of this reaction. But in order to get the reaction going, I need to overcome this hill of energy. So I need to go first all the way up here before I can go down to form these products. And this keeps stability in the system, because if we would go straight from here to here, nothing would hold us back. Well, then, yeah, we would all go up in a puff of smoke, and CO2 and water would be the end of all of us. So this hill of energy keeps the reactants or these chemicals stable. And in order for them to react, you need to overcome this hill of energy. And so we call the amount of energy that is required to go from sort of the starting point where these reactants are to make them react, this amount of energy is called activation energy. Okay, and it can be considerable. Now, the trick with the enzymes is that they temporarily and very specifically lower this amount of activation energy, and so therefore gently help a reaction to proceed. So here is a diagram, shows exactly the same thing. We have reactants A and B. Here's our activation energy that we need to put into the system in order to release then these products, C and D, and then the actual energy change. So the release of energy as this reaction proceeded is this amount from the starting point from A and B down to C and D. So this is the net free energy change. So we call this an exergonic reaction because energy was released. So the products have less energy than the reactants. Here's another example where we have Also, we have reactants E and F here, and they need to overcome this amount of activation energy that's shown right here. But then the products G and H, they actually have more energy than E and F had originally. So now the products have more energy, so therefore we had to put in energy into the system. We have an endergonic reaction. So there, in this case, the products have more energy than the original reactants. Now let's take a look at how this works in biological systems. So here we have, first we're starting out with an exergonic reaction. Let's say you're eating something and you're breaking down the food into smaller molecules. So you're starting out with A and B, and then you end up with a product C and D, and there was some energy released. Some of the energy will be released as heat, and that's you can't really capture that anymore, but some of the energy will also be stored in high energy electrons, which then will form these molecules of NADPH and NADH. So these hydrogens, actually these are the electrons basically, which then can be used in electron transport chains to make ATP. And then this energy can be utilized to drive reactions, say protein synthesis. We'll be starting out with amino acids, let's say E and F here. We're making high energy proteins, G and H. So that will be an endergonic reaction. But these endergonic reactions, they need to be powered by quite a bit of ATP. And let's make this the last slide here of our first recording, the first part of this lecture. So here's a reaction shown that requires quite a bit of energy. So take a look at this huge activation energy that needs to be put in to make this reaction go. So we're starting out with relatively low energy molecules C and D. We're going to end up with A and B, which have considerably more energy than the original reactants. And so naturally, you would expect that there's a huge amount of activation energy that's required to even get started. And then our reactants, our products, A and B, they have much more energy than C and D. So this would be clearly an endergonic reaction that requires quite a bit of energy. But so to be continued, stay tuned, and we'll talk about enzymes in the next section.